Hello everyone and welcome to the Hockey Up. So today we're going to be talking about 3 teams that have had a good off-season and 3 teams that haven't. So my criteria for having a good off-season includes, well, obviously, did the team get better? Did they address their needs? Did they have a good draft? Did they make smart contracts and extensions? Now, and as far as the bad teams go, obviously this would be the opposite. Bad trades, overpayment of players, not a great draft. So we're going to start off with the first team that I believe has not had a good offseason, and that would be the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, Pittsburgh's moves have been very divisive among fans of late, and I'm personally not really a fan of any of them. I think they overpaid for Kasperi Kapanen. They bought out Jack Johnson, which was a good move, but bringing in Cody Ceci is trading one liability for another. The Mike Matheson for Hornquist trade is just an absolute steal for the Florida Panthers. I don't know what Pittsburgh was thinking. They didn't clear cap space, instead just added more cap space and not very useful players. Just their moves haven't been great. They haven't got great returns. Like the Matt Murray trade, for an example. They got a second round pick, which they used on a goaltender anyways, and a C or B level prospect. So, considering what they gave up versus what they got back, I think Pittsburgh took a step back, which they were already heading in a not-so-great direction. Their players are getting older. They did get a bit younger, but it's not like that young talent that they brought in was, something to write home about. Like, Kasperi Kapanen is a good player, but he's not a player that's going to carry this team into the next wave of success. And giving up a first-round draft pick for him is an overpayment, in my opinion, especially since Toronto got a good prospect in Rodin Amirov. Now, not to mention, they also gave up next year's pick to Minnesota, so Pittsburgh didn't have their pick in the 2020 draft, and they're not going to have their pick in the 2021 draft. Now, moving on to a team that I believe has had a good offseason, I have the Calgary Flames. Now, Calgary is a sexy pick to finish atop of maybe the Pacific or the Canadian division, maybe behind a team like Vegas, or if it's the Canadian division of Toronto. But Calgary made a lot of smart signings this offseason. Obviously, the big one being Jacob Markstrom. They solidified their goaltending for a reasonable contract. Considering how good Markstrom has been lately, I'd say that's a fair deal for what he provides. Markstrom should perform very well in a better defensive system in Calgary than what he had in Vancouver. I expect Markstrom to put up really good numbers and a decent amount of wins. They brought in Chris Tanev to offset the loss of TJ Brodie. Now, obviously, losing Brodie hurts because he was a heart and soul guy for that team and a core piece, but Calgary kind of needed a new look. They needed to shake up the core a bit. And losing Brodie, yeah, sucks, but bringing in Tanev, who in my opinion is a similar caliber defenseman, and Tanev was a bit cheaper, I think that's a good move. Juuso Välimäki should be healthy as well, so Calgary's defense is still good. And then I really like what Calgary did with their bottom 6. They added guys like Dominic Simone and Joachim Nordstrom and Josh Levo from Vancouver. So those are good additions because that's really going to help shore up their bottom 6, which was a problem. And it also takes some of the pressure off the top guys like Gaudreau and Monheim to consistently perform. Because now, if Gaudreau's going through a slump, or Tkachuk, or Monahan, or some of the big boys in Calgary, you can still get goals from that bottom 6, which they weren't necessarily getting before, maybe aside from a guy like Andrew Mangiapane. So I really like what Calgary did. I think they shored up their team's needs a lot. I think, obviously, the Markstrom addition is massive for them. And overall, I think they just made a lot of good, solid moves. Now, moving on to another team that I feel did not have a great offseason was the Vancouver Canucks, one of Calgary's rivals. Now, Vancouver just lost a lot in free agency. They lost Markstrom, who's one of the best goalies in the league. They lost Tanev, who is their best shutdown defenseman and a real heart and soul player for them. They lost Toffoli, which I know Toffoli was a rental, but still. They lost Levo, and they lost Stetcher. Now, obviously, they got back Braden Holtby to be the starter, or maybe a split starter with Demko, but Holtby is a downgrade on Markstrom, so I don't feel like they got better in net. I get Demko could become a great starter and become the real thing, but Markstrom was already the real thing. So just looking at this offseason in general, I think their goaltending got a bit weaker. Now, obviously, Demko could go on and have an amazing breakout year like Connor Hellebuck did a few years ago, but that's no guarantee. And then the blue line, obviously, I do like the Nate Schmidt trade for Vancouver. They got him for cheap, and Schmidt is a true top four defenseman. He can play top pairing. Him and Hughes should be a decent top pairing, especially from an offensive standpoint. But they also, like, losing Stetcher and Tanev for Schmidt, I don't know how I feel about that. I do really like the Schmidt ad, like I said, but losing both Stetcher and Tanev, it's just their defensive depth got worse. And I know a guy like Ole Juolevi could come up and look really solid, but that's no guarantee. So overall, Vancouver lost a lot without getting too much back. And I understand that, their star players like Pettersson and Hughes could carry them through and make the playoffs, and that's fine. But just looking at strictly what they lost and what they gained, I don't think you could call this offseason a win for Vancouver. Now, moving on to a team that you can call this offseason a win for, I have the Colorado Avalanche. Now, Colorado is a team that shored up some needs, except for goaltending, but we'll get to that later, without giving up a lot. They got Brandon Saad for Nikita Sidorov, who wasn't really fitting in their top six anymore anyways. They re-signed Andrei Burakovsky to a good deal, as well as Tyson Jost, and they got Devon Toews for a couple of draft picks. So their blue line got better, their forward core got better. They're going to have a second line of Saad, Kadri, and Burakovsky, and that's a really solid second line. That's a second line that is a first line on a lot of teams. So their forward depth got better, their defensive depth got better. The only problem that I have with Colorado is I'm not sure about their goaltending. When healthy, I think their goaltending is fine, but Grubauer is injury prone, and I don't think Francouz is good enough to carry the load of a starter, and we saw that in this past year's playoffs. That's ultimately what doomed them against Dallas. But overall, in my opinion, Colorado is one of the best teams in the National Hockey League, and they're probably my pick to win the Stanley Cup next year, and a big part of that is the moves that they made. Getting Brandon Saad for cheap, and I know he's only got 1 year left, but that's fine, because then they have to re-sign McCarr after the season, so then that frees up some money for that. Getting Devon Toews really rounds out that top six, and he should fit in quite well. So I think Colorado just made more smart moves, just like they did last offseason with the Kadri trade and everything. Joe Sakic is one of the best GMs in the National Hockey League. Him and Yzerman would be my two picks for the best in the league, and Sakic proved it again this offseason. But now our final team that I don't feel has had a very good offseason would be the Arizona Coyotes. Now, Arizona, quite frankly, has been kind of a dumpster fire this offseason, between losing the draft picks for tampering with the draft class, obviously the whole Mitchell Miller situation, which is just ugly. They should not have drafted him. Not much more needs to be said about that situation. It's just not good. But losing Taylor Hall for nothing, and really, they didn't add anybody. They're going with the same stagnant team that they've had for years past. There was all these talks about, they might trade off Ekman-Larsson and get a good package back for him, but it never really happened. So, Arizona only really lost Taylor Hall, obviously, Vinny Hinostroza as well, but I just think all the drama that's come out of that team, they didn't get better, they definitely got a bit worse, and all the drama that's come out of that team, the offseason's been ugly for them. They didn't have a pick in the first 3 rounds of the draft, so it's not even like we can sit here and say, they had a good draft. It's been a really rough offseason for Coyotes fans, and frankly, I don't know how much longer that team is going to stay in Glendale. It's such a mess right now, and that organization really needs to find some stability. So, moving on to the final team that I believe has had a good offseason, well, not the final team, but for this list, would be the Montreal Canadiens. Now, Montreal addressed a lot of their needs, and like Calgary, I'm going to dive into that in a later, more in-depth video reviewing Montreal's offseason. They got the backup goalie, they improved the defense, they improved the scoring with Tyler Toffoli, they got a power forward in Josh Anderson. I feel that they had a decent draft. I know Caden Gooley is a divisive pick at 16, but Jan Misak in the second round is a steal for sure. Re-signing Petrie and Gallagher to their extensions as well, I think is really smart, especially Gallagher, a heart and soul player. I know I've said that a lot, but Gallagher is the definition of that type of player. So Montreal really did a lot of smart moves. I know the Josh Anderson one is risky, to say the least. Very risky. And that's what holds Montreal back from, being the true winners of the offseason. Because I don't have any of these teams in any particular order. Like, I don't think, Calgary had the best out of the three or anything. It's just 3 teams I feel had a good one, 3 teams I feel had a bad one. And I think most people would agree that Montreal had a good offseason, and instead of changing their identity, they built upon it. They added guys that fit their system, that fit the style of game they want to play, and I think that should result in Montreal being a better team, same as I think Calgary should be a better team, and Colorado should be an even better team. Whereas the other teams on the other side of the list, I think, will likely take a step back. The only team that I think could still be quite good would be Vancouver, because they've got that young talent. And obviously, it's hard to bet against Pittsburgh sometimes, but I don't know. Like, the end has got to come for Pittsburgh's window soon. And when you have a guy like Crosby saying, yeah, the window might be closing, things could be better in Pittsburgh right now. But that does it for this video. I'm going to be doing more in-depth reviews of the Canadian teams offseason, and then maybe a few American teams later on as well, talking about their additions and subtractions, grading it, the draft, free agency, all that wonderful stuff. So if you watched to the end of the video, I greatly appreciate it, and if you could leave a like, maybe comment, and hopefully subscribe, that would be appreciated as well. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.